It was exactly 3:17 a.m. on November 14th, 2024. I was at my desk at the Starlink Operations Center in Hawthorne, California. Aisle 4, where the Level 2 analysts sit, was practically empty, except for the constant hum of the server cooling systems. On my main monitor, the Starlink constellation heat map showed the usual traffic over North America. Green meant stable. Yellow meant high latency. Red meant packet loss. That night, the entire map flashed red for 2 seconds. It wasn't a regional glitch. It was a synchronized blackout. I put down my coffee and pulled my keyboard closer. My first reaction was to check the master server, thinking we'd lost connection to the fiber optic backbone in Seattle. But the ground connection was perfect. The problem was coming from above. A single node, identified in the system only as 3i Atlas, had just transmitted a high-priority data packet. What made my blood run cold wasn't the transmission itself, but the fact that that node shouldn't have been active. 3i Atlas was listed in our technical manuals as inactive, a piece of test hardware that had never been turned on. As I tried to trace the command's origin, I noticed something even more disturbing. The data packet wasn't being sent to residential internet terminals. It wasn't going to rooftop dishes on rural homes or ships at sea. The signal was being directed specifically to ground-based mobile receivers. Thousands of them. Within seconds, I saw response logs scrolling up on my secondary screen. They were receipt confirmations. They were cars. The inactive satellite had just communicated with thousands of Tesla vehicles parked in a grid covering parts of Ohio and Pennsylvania. I tried to abort the process, typing in the standard transmission cancellation command. The screen froze. The cursor stopped blinking. An error message I'd never seen in my 6 years at the company appeared in the bottom left corner. It read simply, "Access restricted by infrastructure priority." I looked around, expecting to see people running, phones ringing, panic. But the office remained in absolute silence. The emergency lights didn't come on. No one screamed. It was as if the system knew exactly what it was doing, and I was the only error in the equation. In that moment, with my hands trembling over the frozen keyboard, I asked myself the question that would change my life forever. Why would a dead satellite wake up in the dead of night to send a secret command to civilian cars sleeping in their garages?
My name doesn't matter, but my role does. I was a senior network traffic analyst. My job wasn't glamorous. I didn't build rockets, and I didn't talk to astronauts. I was paid to monitor the stability of data flow between satellites and ground stations. Basically, I was a digital plumber. If a pipe clogged, I notified maintenance. If there was a data leak, I closed the valve. It was a monotonous, predictable, and extremely safe routine. I liked that. I liked knowing that if I did my job right, no one would notice I existed. That November night, my routine had been the same as always. I arrived at 11 at night, swiped my badge at the security turnstile of Building 1, grabbed a watered-down coffee from the hallway machine, and sat at Station 34. The first 4 hours were absolute boredom. Some latency spikes in Europe, a scheduled reboot at a gateway in Japan. Nothing that required more than 2 clicks. I was even thinking about what I'd do on my day off. Maybe fix my backyard fence. That was when the first strange detail appeared. Before the map flashed red, I noticed a line of code scrolling up the diagnostic terminal on the left screen. It was a handshake request, a digital handshake, coming from a low orbital altitude. The identification protocol was old, something we hadn't used since 2021. The system identified the source as 3i Atlas. I frowned. Atlas wasn't standard nomenclature for our commercial satellites. Our batches were named sequentially or by version numbers. Atlas sounded like an internal project, something from the Defense Department or advanced research. I opened the technical file for that node. It was empty. No launch date, no mass, no designated orbit, just the status inactive in gray letters. I thought it was a database error, a system ghost, as we call it when an old record shows up by mistake. I was about to delete the command line to clear the screen when data traffic spiked. It wasn't gigabytes of video or games. They were tiny packets, 4 kilobytes each, extremely light, extremely fast. A file that size is usually a simple text file, or worse, a command executable, and they were coming down to earth like an invisible rain. At that moment, I still thought it was just a bizarre technical glitch, a bug in the control software. I had no idea I was looking at a gun being cocked. I tried to rationalize the situation. I thought maybe it was a corrupted firmware update being sent to the Starlink terminals in the cars. After all, the integration between the satellites and the brand's vehicles was a strong selling point. But something didn't add up. Firmware updates are heavy. They're hundreds of megabytes. That 4 kilobyte packet was surgical. It was a key, not an update, and the speed at which the vehicles responded was impossible for a standard internet connection. The response time was in milliseconds, indicating that those cars were somehow waiting for that signal. I decided to do what any analyst would do. I tried to isolate the 3i Atlas node from the main network to prevent it from causing further instability. I typed in the quarantine command. The system rejected it. I tried again using my Level 2 administrator password. Rejected again. The message on the screen changed. Now it read, "Operation in progress. Do not power off." I felt a chill run down my spine. Who was operating this? There was no one logged in to the master terminal besides me and the night shift supervisor, who was in his glass-walled office across the floor. That was when I saw the first physical proof that this wasn't an error. I managed for a brief moment to open the header of one of the data packets before they were encrypted. It was a sequence of alphanumeric characters. In the middle of the code, there was a readable string, OVR/STP/auth. In systems engineering jargon, that was short for Override Stop Authority. In plain English, it was a command that bypassed any decision made by the driver or the autopilot. I grabbed my personal phone, which was strictly forbidden inside the operations room, and took a photo of the trembling screen. The image turned out poor, with glare from the ceiling lights, but you could clearly read the line of code and the time, 3:19 a.m. Seconds after I took the picture, my screen flickered and went black. The system rebooted on its own. When the system came back up, the log had disappeared. The 3i Atlas record was gone. The map was green again. Everything looked normal. But I knew it wasn't. It looked like a system test, but the feeling I had was that I'd just watched someone testing the lock on my front door in the middle of the night.
I stood up from my chair, my legs feeling heavy. I needed to speak to the supervisor. I walked down the carpeted aisle toward the glass-walled office in the center of the floor. The supervisor, a man named David, was on the phone. He seemed calm, too calm for someone who should have seen the entire board flash red just minutes earlier. When I walked in, he hung up the phone, gently, without saying goodbye to whoever was on the other end. He looked at me with a blank expression, almost bored. I asked if he had seen the latency spike in the Atlas node. He smiled, a cold, corporate smile. He said it was just a recalibration of the orbit sensors, and that the engineering team had already handled it. I pushed back. I mentioned the 4 kilobyte packet. I mentioned the cars responding. I mentioned the forced stop code. His smile vanished. He stood up, walked around his desk, and stopped right in front of me. The shift in his demeanor was drastic. He no longer looked like my tired night shift boss. He looked like a nightclub bouncer blocking the door. David told me I was tired. He said the night shift plays tricks on the mind and that I should take an early break. He didn't ask what I had seen. He stated what I was supposed to do. As he spoke, I noticed his monitor was off. Not in sleep mode, but powered down completely. He wasn't monitoring anything. He was waiting. I felt a clear sense of a cover-up. It wasn't incompetence on his part. It was an instruction. I went back to my desk, but I didn't sit down. I looked around and realized that 2 other colleagues sitting in distant rows were watching me. When our eyes met, they immediately looked away at their screens. The atmosphere had changed. The hum of the servers seemed louder. The temperature in the room seemed to have dropped. I knew that if I tried to access that log again, something would happen. The institutional silence wasn't an absence of a response. It was the loudest answer they could give.
I couldn't just let it go. Technical curiosity and the fear of being complicit in something illegal outweighed everything else. I knew that digital logs at my station had been wiped, but there was one place the digital system couldn't scrub instantly: the physical redundancy logs in the server room. It was an ancient dot matrix printer, kept in the basement strictly for total catastrophe scenarios, printing every critical network event line by line. It was an archaic system, noisy and forgotten by almost everyone. I took the fire stairs to avoid the elevator. The basement was cold and smelled of ozone. I badged into the backup room. The printer was there in a dark corner, spitting out paper. The rhythmic sound of the pen on paper was hypnotic. I walked over and grabbed the continuous feed piling up on the floor. My eyes scanned the blurry lines of text until I found the timestamp, 0317. The record was there, but it was worse than I imagined. The command sent by 3i Atlas hadn't just been received by the cars. The printer log showed the telemetry return from the vehicles. There were thousands of identical lines coming from different locations. The car's response wasn't just a received. The return code was BRK-ENG-LCK, break, engage, lock. And right after it, CAM-ACT-RMT, camera activated remotely. This wasn't a comms test. The command had engaged the brakes of thousands of cars simultaneously and activated their internal and external cameras. It was 3:17 in the morning. Most of those cars were parked, but what if one was moving? What if someone was driving down a deserted highway? What I was looking at was proof of a master switch capable of physically immobilizing an entire fleet and turning every vehicle into a live surveillance camera, all without the owner's knowledge. If you're watching this and you drive a modern car, take a second to ask yourself if you're really in control of it. I folded the paper and shoved it into the inside pocket of my jacket. My hands were clammy. I held physical proof of a privacy and security violation on an industrial scale. But as I cross-referenced the data, I realized the 3i Atlas node didn't belong to the commercial Starlink grid. The identification prefix on the printout showed a routing path that went through servers in Langley, Virginia. This discovery was too serious to be a company error. It was a collaboration. I went up the stairs, trying to stay calm, but my heart was pounding in my throat. When I reached the ground floor, I tried to swipe my badge at the door leading to the employee parking lot. The red light flashed. Access denied. I tried again. Red. I looked up at the security camera above the door and knew with absolute certainty that someone was watching me right then. The danger wasn't theoretical anymore. It was a fact. I headed back to the main lobby. The front desk guards, who always greeted me with a nod, wouldn't look at me.
One of them was talking into his radio, voice low, hand cupping his mouth. I knew what was happening. My access had been revoked. I wasn't an employee anymore. I was a liability, a security breach that needed to be contained. The pressure in my chest tightened. I had a piece of paper in my pocket, proving they could stop cars remotely. What would they do to stop me? I decided to leave through the main entrance, where there was more visibility. As I walked toward my car, I felt my phone vibrate. It was a notification from my own vehicle's app. It just read, "Scheduled maintenance service, high priority." I hadn't scheduled anything. I stopped in the middle of the dark lot. My car was there, 30 meters away. The interior lights flicked on by themselves, then off. The fear I felt wasn't of dying. It was the fear of being erased, the fear of being discredited, of becoming that crazy guy telling conspiracy theories in bars. I got into my car, an older model, no internet connection, no autopilot, and peeled out of there. As I drove down the empty highway, I checked the rearview mirror obsessively. Every pair of headlights behind me felt like a threat. I wasn't running from a person. I was running from a system that had eyes everywhere.
In the days that followed, I lay low in a cheap motel outside of town. I paid cash. I kept my phone off. But I needed to understand what 3i Atlas was. I went to a public library and used an old computer to dig through old launch records. It took a while, but I found it. In a declassified defense budget document from 2018, there was a mention of a project called Intelligent Infrastructure Initiative. The acronym was 3I. The document described the creation of a contingency network for loss of civil control scenarios. It wasn't about fast internet for everyone. It was about traffic control, movement containment, and distributed surveillance. The 3i Atlas satellite wasn't an exception, it was the prototype. The partial but terrifying revelation was that the Starlink system didn't just exist to provide internet. A part of it, a hidden layer grafted onto the network, served as a global override infrastructure, a dormant system waiting for a command to take control. That night's test, that 4-kilobyte pulse, was a readiness exercise. They wanted to know if, should it become necessary, they could stop all vehicles in a specific area instantly. The answer was yes, they could. And the activated cameras? Probably for visual confirmation of the immobilization. What remains hidden is the motive. Why test this now? Why on November 14th, 2024? What kind of crisis are they anticipating that requires a kill switch for private transport? The tension of knowing this is unbearable. It's not about aliens or monsters. It's about engineering. It's about code. It's about the fact that your freedom of movement now depends on a server that can decide you aren't going anywhere. I looked at the printout I still keep with me. The ink is starting to fade, but the truth is there. They have the keys. We are just passengers.
2 weeks later, I received a registered letter at my parents' address. It wasn't a death threat. It was a retroactive non-disclosure agreement and a termination notice for severe violation of security protocols and unauthorized access to sensitive data. Along with the letter came a generous severance package, enough for me to live for a few years without working. If I signed, I admitted guilt, but got the money. If I talked, they would sue me into oblivion. I didn't sign. But I didn't go to the police either. Who would believe me? To anyone who doesn't understand, that printed paper is just a list of codes. The system is still up there. I look at the sky at night and see the little dots of light from the satellites trailing in a line. People think it's beautiful. I feel a knot in my stomach. The 3i Atlas node has gone back to inactive status in the public logs, if anyone other than me even knows to look for it. I moved to a different city. I work repairing old electronics now. Analog stuff. Radios, amplifiers, things that don't connect to the network. But whenever I see a Tesla or any connected car pass on the street, I slow my pace. I keep waiting for the brake lights to turn on by themselves. I keep waiting for the day when they all stop at the same time, not because of traffic, but because someone in a cold room in Hawthorne or Langley pushed a button. I survived, but I carry the weight of knowing the cage has already been built. All that's left is for them to close the door. If you've watched this far, I need you to do something important. It's not just for the channel, it's to keep this conversation alive. Subscribe and hit the bell, because I don't know how long videos like this stay up. And I want to know, which city or country are you watching this from? Write it in the comments. I want to know how far our voice still reaches before the signal is cut.